friends, Miss Midoff here, talk to you about member of a profession. Today, the objectives are to examine specific legal concepts as well as ethical issues that impact the care of patients and their families, especially those with complex medical surgical histories and problems. We're also going to examine behaviors that promote our growth, development, and practice of professional nursing, and outline our personal and professional responsibilities to maintain professional competence as a registered nurse. Oftentimes when I give this lecture, it's not the most sexy topic. It deals with all the legal stuff surrounding member of a profession. But I want to encourage you to stay with me. I promise you that I've given this lecture various semesters and the feedback that I get is remarkable. There's going to be things in here that you would have heard already, and there's things that you would have learned and really expanded on your knowledge of what member of a profession means. And so I encourage you to stay with me and keep engaged, and let's keep going. The Texas Nurse Practice Act. This is what regulates our practice as nurses, which ensures the protection and promotion of the welfare of the people of Texas. And how do they do that? They do that by ensuring that anybody that calls themselves a nurse, whether that be an LVN or an RN or an advanced practice registered nurse, is competent and can practice safely. And who is this enforced by? Before I get there, I like to use analogies to tie in what we know to something that we really know quite well. The National Traffic and Motor Vehicle Safety Act was enacted in 1966, just like our Texas Nurse Practice Act was. This empowered the federal government to set and administer new standards for safety for motor vehicles and the road traffic safety. Why do I bring this up? Well, it's very similar to the Nurse Practice Act. Can you imagine driving without laws and the rules? There would be so many accidents, chaos, and possible death. Out of this act came the State Department of Motor Vehicles, and they ensure that people that are driving are competent and safe to drive. But how do they do this? In order for you to get a driver's license, you need to pass a written and a driving test. And then who enforces this? The police, and depending on the jurisdiction, the sheriffs and the constables. And just because you might know the speed limit of I-10 is 60, if you go to another city or state, it might change. And so ignorance is not an excuse. We need to know the state acts and rules. And I'm going to come back to this analogy various times throughout the presentation and go back into how this relates to nursing. The Texas Nurse Practice Act tells us what one needs to do in order to get licensed. We need to graduate from a nursing program and pass your boards. But in order to graduate from a nursing program, you can attest to all the things you need to do. It also lays the groundwork for disciplinary action, just as if you were to get into a car accident or pass a red light, you might get a ticket and get fined. The act also lays out the rights. Have you ever watched those TV shows when a police officer arrests someone, they tell them their rights? Same concept here. I want you to know that you have certain rights as a nurse. We will talk about those rights a little bit later on. And as I've already mentioned, ignorance is not acceptable. We have to obey other cities' traffic laws and can't assume that the speed limit is always 60 on the highway and 30 on a residential area. We must be vigilant and know the law. We already talked about how the board keeps people accountable. They do this by making sure that there are standards. They ask questions to see if the standard was met when a complaint or an issue is brought before them. Another way to view this standard is to ask yourself what you expect from nursing in this situation. What would a prudent nurse do is what they ask. What does prudent mean? Prudent means showing thought or concern for the future. The board also looks at the situation from the angle of how do you do what you do, not can you do that skill or that technique? Because honestly, anyone can administer medication, but how did you administer that medication? Did you follow the 5 rights? Was there harm done in administering that medication? Are you capable and competent to know the side effects of that medication that you're given? That's what they want to know. That's what the board wants to know. And the board also looks at complaints through standards of what is allowed to be done by an RN versus an LVN, or known as their scope of practice. based on their knowledge of the potential for harm and utmost benefit. The nursing board functions like the police or the sheriff. They enforce the Texas Nurse Practice Act by establishing the standards and regulating who can call themselves a nurse. If they get a complaint, they investigate the validity of the claim. Further on, we'll talk about how a complaint is handled, because not all complaints end up in license revocation or your license being taken away. And that's what I want to stress to you. They discipline violators through legal action. We will talk about this process as we move on. I really want to empower future nurses to know about the process so that you are not scared that you will get your license taken away, but also to know that you have rights under the law and know how to use them. They also provide public meetings for comment about recommendations that should be implemented, amended, or done away with. We will look at a newsletter that the board is responsible for putting out so that you know how the information is presented, because this too will empower you to stay abreast and not be fearful about what maintaining competence as a nurse is and as a license holder. It's important for you to know that these resources are there, and more importantly, know how to use them to your benefit. Some common professional complaints are that the patient falls, especially those that result in injury or death, medication errors, improper use of equipment, improper use of restraints. So many injuries have and can happen, which is why many facilities don't use restraints until it is the last resort, because so many negatives can happen and have happened. Sentinel events, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Improper assessment and documentation. Guys, this is huge. This is why knowing the expected versus the expected changes you would see in a condition is critical. And if you don't know what is abnormal or abnormally high, how will you know to report it? Having a solid understanding of anatomy and physiology and knowing why you do what you do will give you that extra confidence to wake a doctor up in the middle of the night because you know your patient is critical. Nursing is not immune to politics, but when it comes to the safety of your patient and maintenance of your license, it is extremely important you report changes. Other common ethical violations: breach of patient privacy, misrepresentation of facts and lying, failure to report others' violations of privacy against patients, violence against colleagues and patients, communication against employers. This is huge, and it is getting even bigger. It used to be that the board wasn't concerned so much about what you did in your personal life, but that's not the case anymore. What you say, post, or do in your personal life can mean you losing your job and maybe even your license. When you become a nurse, you are a nurse practically 24/7. This is not to scare you, but rather to tell you and to help you become aware that this is happening and will continue to get more involved. Any violation of patient's Bill of Rights? What are those Bill of Rights anyways? The right to know their medication, right to create an advance directive, right to know the risks and the benefits and risks of surgery. Question: can a patient's Bill of Rights be violated and it still be legal? What do you think? Yes. As in the case of child or elder abuse, you have a legal responsibility to report it. Also, you need to report a sexually transmitted infection, which can be deadly and highly transmissible in a community. So yes, a patient Bill of Rights can be violated and it still be legal. Other issues that may predispose a nurse to board or legal action. Here is where we want to discuss where you are a nurse 24/7. And what you do in your personal life might jeopardize your employment as well as your professional license. If you get caught with a DUI or a DWI, fraud, hot checks, food stamp fraud, burglary, theft, substance abuse, drugs, assault, battery, family violence, failure to timely renew your license, unethical billing practices, verbal abuse, child abuse, elder abuse, boundary violations with patients, tax evasion, fraud, or gambling, or defaulting on your school loans might mean that you get your license revoked. All in all, the board cares that your personal life mirrors what you're doing in your professional life, and they want nurses to be honest and ethical. So that's why if what you do in your personal life doesn't jive with what you're doing in your professional life, they'll take away your license. Peer review action and safe harbor. Remember I talked about how not every incident gets reported to the board? Most nursing students and brand new nurses are afraid about getting their license taken away. But let's look how nurses might be subject to peer review, which is something that happens usually before you get reported to the board. Here's what happens. The board manages thousands of nurses in the state of Texas. If every single complaint came to them about every little single thing that they did or nurses did in the state, they would not be able to do anything else. This is why the board recommends and empowers hospitals and facilities that employ nurses to have and create a peer review board or a committee. A peer review is a group of nurses that you work with that sit on a committee and sift through complaints and issues that occur within their facility. The peer review looks at incidences and decides if it is a minor incident. If it is, then it gets handled in-house within the facility that you work in. If it is not a minor incident, then it gets reported to the board. And even if it is a major incident to the peer review committee and gets reported to the board, it might not be seen as a major issue to the board, but rather a minor one. Even the board has to have a process for how they handle complaints, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. How does your peer review board at your facility you work for or intend to work for manage complaints, incidences that are brought before them? Let's take a look at how to determine if an incident is minor or major. We're going to click on this incident is minor. The flow sheet to determine if an error is a minor incident. A minor incident. Conduct by a nurse that may be in violation of the Nurse Practice Act or a board rule, but does not indicate the nurse's continued practice poses a risk of harm to a patient or another person. It's synonymous with a minor error or a minor violation of the Texas Nurse Practice Act or board rule. We start here in the top left corner. An error occurred. It's in red. What the peer review, not the board, is going to look at is 1. Did a deficit in the nurse's knowledge, judgment, skill, or professional responsibility or patient advocacy contribute to the incident? If no, the error may not reach the level of minor incident. Proceed down here, and we'll get there. If yes, will remediation address any identified deficit? No, then it needs to be reported. Yes, then they need to decide, the peer review committee needs to decide if remediation will solve it, come up with a plan to address the deficiencies, come up with a time frame for you guys to complete those deficiencies, and evidence of completion should be documented in accordance with this rule. Then report the nurse to the nursing peer review committee or the board if the nurse does not complete the remediation. Proceed to D2. D2 looks at the factors beyond the nurse's control that contributed to the incident. It looks at looking at the possibility of this error happening again. This error might be because the facility or the hospital is how the facility or the hospital is run. And then the safety committee gets involved and is responsible to making sure that those contributing factors get fixed. So if the factors beyond the nurse's control contributed to the incident, no, then proceed to E. We'll get to that. If yes, then report to the patient safety committee and go to D3. D3 looks at would the error still have occurred if there were no factors beyond the nurse's control that contributed to the error? No. Proceed to E. We'll get to that. Yes. If the error only occurred because of the factors beyond the nurse's control and there were no contribution by the nurse, meaning the nurse does not have a deficit in knowledge, judgment, skill, professional responsibility, or patient advocacy, then the error may not be reviewable under this rule. Proceed to H. We'll look at H. All right, let's look at E. They look at the nurse's history at this point. Has the nurse had more than one incident before in the past, regardless of the time frame? Yes, yes, or no. Yes, more than five incidents within a 12-month period. or yes, less than 5 instances within a 12-month period, or no, proceed to H. If yes, report the nurse to the nursing peer review committee or to the board if there is no nursing peer review committee. Yes, if less than 5 within a 12-month period, do a minor incident indicate a pattern of practice that determines the nurse's continued practice poses a risk of harm. So the nursing peer review committee is building a case against you and documenting that this is something that is happening. So if it happens again, then they're going to go through this and they're going to pull out that instance that this happened before and use that in determining whether to report you to the board of nursing or not. If no, go to H. If yes, report the nurse to the nursing peer review committee or the board. H. It's looking at if you pose a substantial risk, serious injury, or death to a patient, if you have a chemical dependency or abuse of drugs or alcohol, mental illness, diminished mental capacity, if you have a history of abuse or fraud or violation of professional boundaries, or actions that indicate your lack of knowledge, skill, judgment, professional accountability, or consciousness to the extent that if you were to continue practice, it would pose a risk to a patient. And so this is the flow sheet that the nursing peer review will look at before reporting you to the board. Now, if your facility that you work in does not have a nursing peer review committee, then you would get reported to the board of nursing right away. But just because you get reported to the board of nursing, the board of nursing also follows something to this extent, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Now there will be some instances where I'm sure you're going to be going to work and you will be short-staffed, or you believe in good faith that the assignment or work conditions you are working under are not safe. And this is where invoking safe harbor comes in. What do you do in this instance? Well, safe harbor is a nursing peer review form that are available on the Board of Nurse website. So let's go there. So this is the Safe Harbor Forms Nursing Peer Review, and this is on the Texas Board of Nursing. What this is a form that the nurse can fill out if you believe you are about to accept an unsafe assignment. You're going to engage in conduct beyond the scope of your practice or unprofessional or illegal conduct. Some things to know about peer review, and you can read this on your own, but the board's stance is that if you come to work and you are thinking to yourself, oh my goodness, this is going to be a bad day, and the board and the hospital don't want you to leave. They would prefer an inexperienced nurse over no nurse. They don't want you to walk away and not care for your patients just because you're afraid of what is going to happen to your license if something bad happens or something bad happens within your shift. Safe Harbor for peer review is a written documentation guide to help facilities document their Safe Harbor nursing peer review process. And it talks about it right here. Once Safe Harbor is invoked, then if something were to happen during your shift, say a medication error occurred and you were sent to the peer review and the board for this incident and you invoked Safe Harbor, then they would look at your case in light of the situation of what you wrote in your documentation in this quick request form or the BON comprehensive written request for Safe Harbor nursing peer review form. Something to note, you must invoke Safe Harbor at the start of your shift or before engaging in whatever event you think might put your license in jeopardy. In other words, you can't partake in the event and then invoke Safe Harbor. It needs to be done before. And then you must close out your request at the end of your shift or whenever Safe Harbor is done, meaning you can't leave work and then come back to finish it later. One last thing about Safe Harbor. Safe Harbor is not a ticket to do whatever you want during your shift and get away with it. This is not to abuse your professional responsibility as a nurse, but rather to allow you to continue to work even if you know this is dangerous. And anything that happens might be something that is likely to be reported to the board and possibly lose your license over. Also, something extremely important for you to note, that even though Safe Harbor might protect your license, it does not protect you against a lawsuit. right here. We will talk about this a little bit later on. Let's use an example that you get into a car accident and it is your fault. Normally, you would call the cops and they would write up a ticket. But in this case, the person you hit says, you know what, let's get this done without getting the police involved. You guys exchange information and you get it taken care of between the both of you. But then a few weeks later, they file a lawsuit against you because they're in so much pain because of the accident. You might not have a police record of the event because you never called the police, and you might still be able to keep your license. But you will still have to go to court and either settle or go before a judge and pay damages. Again, we will talk about this a little bit later on. But just know that Safe Harbor deals with your license, but it does not protect you against a lawsuit that a person might bring against you, which has nothing to do with the Board of Nursing. Either way, you have your rights in both circumstances, both with the Board of Nursing and in a lawsuit, and that is due process rights. Due process rights under the Nurse Practice Act. If you were to get reported to the board also has a process to decide if there is something that the board will handle because it is major, and this incident poses a serious threat to the public or not. It's kind of like the minor incident flow sheet we reviewed earlier, but now the board is doing this. If it is determined that this needs to be further investigated, then you have the right to know the claims brought against you. And before any action can be done on behalf of your license, then you can rebut those claims to prove you met the standard. Now, what happens if the board decides that an incident needs to be investigated? Well, you as the RN get notified. Your due process right kicks in, and you are allowed to rebut allegations and show conformance with the Nurse Practice Act. Meanwhile, while the board is investigating, a lawsuit might be going on and you might be in jeopardy of losing your place of employment. This is up to the place where you work to decide if they still want to keep you employed knowing what happened. They might decide to keep you on and move you to a safer alternative location or unit while the board decides what they are going to do, what they're going to do with your license. There are some cases that the Board of Nursing investigates and then are settled. You are told to do some education classes or pay a fine, but you never have to appear before a judge like you see in the movies. Other times you will have to report before a judge and pay a lawyer on your behalf. If you have malpractice insurance or professional license, just like if you have car insurance, they might be able to help you with the legal fees associated with your case, which is so important you have personal malpractice or professional insurance just in the event you need to rebut your case before the Board of Nursing or you are named in a lawsuit. To continue, once the Board of Nursing reviews all the evidence, they can settle or they can decide to proceed in a formal process. Once a decision is made based on the circumstances of the case, they issue the decision of the case or investigation. For instance, they might refer a nurse who has a substance abuse problem to a TPAPN program or a Texas Peer Assistance Program for nurses. One thing I want to mention is that the board does not want to take your license. The board is made up of other nurses, so they know what it takes to get through the nursing program. Their approach has changed and that they want to provide you an opportunity to kick the habit or get you the education that you need or the help that you need. We will talk about other programs to help those nurses who need additional help with education. The board wants to take care of people that care for other people. If communities keep losing nurses due to mental illness or drug addiction or get punished for lack of knowledge, then we will keep losing nurses. So they want to provide nurses to fix the problem and get back to helping their patients. In the Texas Peer Assistance Program for nurses, it safeguards patients by providing early identification, support, monitoring, accountability, and advocacy to Texas nurses. Those that experience mental health are referred to, or substance abuse are referred to the TPAPN. There's a drug test, substance use, and mental health assessment to diagnose the problem to come up with treatments, kind of like the nursing process. Then they came up with a plan. They helped set up the treatment, the recovery, the support, the supervision and the restriction. Participation requirement are based on referral, information, diagnosis, severity, remissions, individual needs, and license type. Then the nurse either adheres to it or does not adhere to the program, and if non-adherent, then they get reported to the board. If you were ever wanting to work for the government and you had a sanction or penalty against you, then it would be reported to the government and would be on your record. In the newsletter, there is updates on the decision that are taken against nursing licenses. I'm going to show that to you right now. So this is a bulletin that the nurse sends out every quarter. It talks about this is for July 2020. Talks about the new Texas nurse licensing system that was launched, free COVID-19 courses. There's a little table of contents. Talks about a partnership between 5 rural hospitals and 2 community colleges. It shows pictures of other nurses that pose themselves as nurses but really were not, and it gives you a little brief history as to how they found out that this person was not a nurse. The summary of actions is regular meetings of the Board of Nursing to be held on these dates in Austin, and a summary of the Board of actions taken during this meeting, amendments, other laws that were done away with or taken away. What is TPAPN? We talked about that, the Texas Peer Assistance Program for nurses who need help with an identified substance or mental health condition, and a little bit more information about what they can do and how to find more information. Effects of COVID-19 on nursing education in Texas. It also talks about ethical responsibility of nursing in nursing. We'll talk about that a little bit more. Here it is, Safe Harbor, Nursing Peer Review. We talked about that. The forms have been updated. The bulletin also talks about human trafficking prevention and how we all need to be taking a CEU course on that if we have direct patient contact. Funding opportunities for sexual assault forensic exam ready facility programs. Communicates about IV hydration, about what nurses need to know. Scope of practice decisions. A final note. And then here is the notice of disciplinary action that I was talking to you about, where it gives you the name of the nurse, their license number, and what discipline they were, warning with stipulations, enforced suspension, revoked, and the action date. So this is a matter of public record. And there's quite a bit. And then it has other information about workshops, interactive online learning, CEU courses, and keeping up with your lifelong learning account or your professional license. So the newsletter is really neat, really cool. By now, I hope this has cleared up some misconceptions and possibly the biggest fear you might have regarding losing your nursing license once you get it. Besides getting your license taken away, the board might recommend that you participate in something called the K-STAR. Let's click on the link to see a little bit more information about this. So the K-STAR program, it's a partnership with the Board of Nursing and Texas A&M. And this is the frequently asked questions. You can click on these. What is the K-STAR program? Stands for Knowledge, Skills, Training, Assessment, and Research. It is a program that uses individualized competency assessments and target remediation plans for nurses. This is for you to look at. I'm going to go on to the next slide because I talk a little bit more about the K-STAR program. What the K-STAR program is that if you are deemed by the facility and the Board of Nursing that you have a knowledge, skills, or training deficit, then you might get referred to this K-STAR program located in Texas A&M in Bryan, Texas. Board of Nursing and Texas A&M partnered, and they did a pilot study on what a program would look like to train and educate nurses who had sanctions against them because it was identified they were lacking in this area of skill, knowledge, or training. And that is why they reported it to the board. And what they found out after this pilot study was that nurses could go through the program, it's kind of like school, and continue working while being trained. And this program would help them to become better nurses rather than just taking away their license altogether because of a mistake that they made. Now, if the nurse didn't follow the program plan, then they might have their licenses taken away, but not before giving the nurse an opportunity to fix the underlying problem of either education or additional training. To complete the program, the nurse does have to pay out of pocket, and they have to travel to Bryan, Texas, and complete the program just like nursing school, where they would set you up on a plan and a curriculum that you would have to pass certain criteria that they set. So I think this is really neat for nurses that need additional training. Remember in previous slides, we talked about students' fear of getting their nurse's license taken away? Well, there is another issue we must consider in nursing, and that is a lawsuit by another individual, either a family or a patient. You could be singled out in a lawsuit, or your name could come up in a collective lawsuit with a group of other nurses. Let's talk about the terms you would hear in a lawsuit. Plaintiff, which is the person who is bringing the charges against someone else. Or defendant, the person defending their actions. In a lawsuit, the burden of proof lies with the plaintiff. Meaning, if the plaintiff lost their hand because of something that you did or didn't do, then they must prove the link that what you did or didn't do caused them to lose their hand. Here are 4 elements that must be established for the plaintiff to win. Duty. They must prove there was duty that you had as the nurse to the patient. They will look at the Nurse Practice Act and nursing ethics and other documents to prove this duty you had with the patient. Then they must prove that because you didn't meet this duty to its standard, there was a breach of duty and you've failed to meet the standard. And because of this breach of duty, and because you didn't do what you were supposed to do, or you did do something, then beyond reasonable doubt, it caused the damage to happen. Or in this case, in this example, for them to lose their hand. Loss of a limb can be pain, it can be suffering. If those things I just mentioned cannot be proven and linked, then no damages or money will be paid to the patient. Compensation will be paid if those 4 elements are established in a lawsuit. In a lawsuit case that involves negligence and the plaintiff or the patient is seeking damages or money, they are going to ask the question, what would a prudent nurse have done? Remember, a prudent nurse would be a nurse who acts or shows care for the future of others. Just like a complaint brought before the Board of Nursing, it can be investigated or not investigated. If investigated, then it can be settled or go to trial. The nurse, who is the defendant, must incur the cost. If malpractice insurance is purchased, then this is where it can help the nurse. And there are lawsuits that take a long time to resolve. Generally, statutes of limitation is a law that sets the maximum time the parties involved have to initiate legal action from the date of the alleged offense. So in this case, it would be 2 years. For example, say someone had surgery and didn't develop pain until a year, and they think it is due to the surgery later. They could still come back a year later and file a lawsuit. So that is the statute of limitation. There are strategies to minimize your liability. Establish a good rapport with your patients. Always be nice and thank them. Keep abreast of current trends in your area of expertise. Possess a good working knowledge of standards of care, policies, and procedures, especially where you work, and delegate appropriately. Know your scope Document factually, objectively, utilize acceptable medical verbiage and medically approved abbreviations. Avoid slant words, use proper grammar, no whiteout, no pencils or paper charts. Don't forge your documents. Follow chain of command and escalate issues accordingly. Ask questions and seek clarification when needed. Tips, strategies, continued. Actively participate in the orientation process. Guys, this is so boring sometimes, but in there they talk about a lot of this stuff that I'm talking to you. Know your employment status. Are you contract or employee? And know what can happen if you're on either one of those statuses. Know your organizational hierarchy, the chain of command, and follow it. Know your rights, your grievance processes, safe harbor laws, and trust your gut. If it doesn't feel right, sound right, smell right, that is a red flag. Don't do it. Or stop and think about what to do next. Ask questions. 2 heads are better than 1. Utilize the experts of bioethics committee. Purchase good professional liability insurance, and document. Delegation. When assigning care, do you follow reasonable decision path that is clinically sound for the provider scope of practice, available resources, and employer's policies? If you don't know your delegation procedures and you don't know what you would document to an LVN and what things can be delegated, then review that. You are familiar with this, so please review this on your own. Ethics. Ethics in nursing allows us to view our standards of nursing from a different viewpoint, through the lens of what behavior you would have to follow or uphold in order to keep the standards set forth. Question. What is the difference between the board and an association of nurses? Remember, the board was created to protect the public from anything that a nurse might do or not do. An association is a group of nurses created to support the nursing profession in upholding the standards set by the board, who has been charged with protecting the public. The association offers community to the nurses, resources, education, and support by coming up with the code of ethics. That is one example. If you click on this link, it will take you to the ANA ethics. Our code of ethics means we're accountable for what we do and the role that we fill. It governs our professional body and reflects our moral judgment over time and serves as a standard for our professional actions. The new code consists of 9 provisions with accompanying interpretive statements and serves as the non-negotiable ethical standard outlining the obligations and duties of every individual who enters the nursing profession. Provision 1 through 3 discusses nurse values and beliefs in relation to other humans and how we interact. You can see the words like respect, dignity, patient privacy, patient interest, and confidentiality. Provision 4 through 6 identify the duty and loyalty to the patient. You'll see words like accountability and authority, using our education and judgment to serve and preserve the growth of the nursing profession. Provisions 7 through 9 describe the duties of the nurse that extend beyond individual patient encounters, such as research, human rights, social justice, and integrity. These are all ethical principles that you should be familiar with, so I'm not going to go over them in depth, but please review them on your own. Autonomy, non-maleficence, beneficence, justice, veracity, and fidelity. So go over these, you guys, and know them for the test. We have already talked about the Patient Bill of Rights and how they can be legally violated in the case of harm to the general public or themselves. While we talk about upholding patient rights, how do we measure this in an everyday hospital setting? Have you ever heard of HCAHPS? If you follow the link, it will tell you a little bit more about it. Let's look at that. HCAHPS stands for Hospital Consumer Assessment of Healthcare Provider Systems. It is a patient satisfaction survey required for CMS, or Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, especially if the hospital wants to get reimbursed by them. It is required for all hospitals in the U.S. It is for adult inpatient units. It can be done over the phone, by mail, or email. The survey asks questions regarding doctor communication, nurse communication, staff responsiveness, answering call bells, toileting needs, hospital environment, pain control, pain management, medication communication, discharge information, food services, and overall rating of the hospital. It will ask questions like, how frequently did the physician or nurse communicate with you in a way that you understood? And how frequently was your bathroom kept clean? It gives the patient an opportunity to rate the facility. I like to think of it as like a Yelp or a Google rating for a business, but this is for a hospital. You can check out how the hospitals are rated because it is a matter of public record by clicking on Compare Hospitals in El Paso. And I think this is so neat because this is giving you so much information. So you can look at that at your own time. Professional values, go ahead and click on good professional characters to read a little bit more about professional values. You all have heard of this, the National Patient Safety Goals. It is alarming that medical errors are the third leading cause of death behind cancer and heart disease. 13,150 people die in hospitals every day in ways that could have been prevented. 250 to 440,000 people are estimated to die in the U.S. each year from medical errors. And 4.8 million people are estimated to die globally each year from medical errors. This is why the Joint Commission on their website publishes the National Patient Safety Goals in order to improve patient safety. That is why the Joint Commission on their website publishes the National Patient Safety Goals in order to improve patient safety. In order for hospitals to get reimbursed from insurances, including Medicare, they must be accredited by the Joint Commission. Therefore, their goals focus on problems in healthcare safety and how to resolve them, such as identifying patient correctly by two patient identifiers, using medication safely. Does this sound familiar, you guys? By reconciling or recording and updating the patient's record, preventing infection, preventing falls, preventing bed sores. If we follow these safety measures, nurses don't have complaints, the systems are being followed, and sentinel events or never events are decreased. When the Joint Commission comes to survey hospitals, they use a tracing method. They follow a patient from the time they come into the ER all the way to the department they are sent to when they are discharged from the hospital to try to identify areas of communication breakdown, potential medical errors, etc. Now we're going to be moving on to legal and ethical issues in nursing. By law, based on the Emergency Medical Treatment and Active Labor Act, a patient must receive medical treatment if they come into the hospital or be sent to another facility that will be able to provide them with the same level of care. Now, you guys, do you see this always being done perfectly and perhaps to the standard any human would expect? Of course not. But that is why it is an ethical decision. Another ethical decision, the Patient Self-Determination Act, which states that the person that enters the facility or a hospital has the right to invoke an advance directive, and they have a legal right to invoke a DNR, or do not resuscitate order, or in some facilities, a do not attempt resuscitation order. But this becomes an ethical issue when family members can't agree on when and if CPR or life-saving measures should be withheld or stopped or started. And that is why this is an ethical issue. Another legal and ethical issue is euthanasia. Euthanasia is intentionally ending life to relieve pain, and it is illegal in the United States, and it is considered homicide. But the federal government does have assisted suicide laws, but rather these laws are generally handled at the state level. While active euthanasia is illegal throughout all the U.S., assisted suicide is legal in Colorado, Oregon, Hawaii, Washington, Vermont, Maine, New Jersey, California, and D.C. These laws differ from state to state, but generally individuals need to have a terminal illness with a prognosis of 6 months or less, and the physician has determined that the individual has mental capacity to understand what is going on. Oftentimes, they need to see a medical health professional, a mental health professional, and they need to verbally express the wish to receive a prescription, legal to kill them, for medical aid. It must not be due to age or disability. I was witness to this incident where this patient had ALS, the disease that paralyzes your muscles, including your diaphragm, so that you suffocate on your own. In hospice, and we talk about the difference between hospice and palliative care a little bit later on. But for this patient, this particular patient that I'm talking about, for this patient, while they were on hospice care, the nurse bases her standard of care as a nurse to promote comfort. They are allowed to give large amounts of morphine to ease their pain because the goal of nursing care is not cure, but comfort when it comes to hospice care. At the end of her life, she could not breathe, and you could see that she was having a lot of pain because she was having difficulty breathing. The physician was nearby and kept providing orders for more morphine and more morphine to be given to ease the patient's pain because she could not breathe. Now, you know the main side effect of morphine is respiratory depression, right, you guys? So this goes into double effect, and it's a term to explain how one is allowed to carry an action that might cause serious harm, even death, as a side effect of promoting some good. So in this instance, the patient was in a lot of pain because she could not breathe because of her condition. We were giving her morphine to help with her pain, knowing full well that a side effect of morphine is respiratory depression. And when the patient stopped breathing, the ethical issue is, did the morphine stop the patient from breathing, or did the patient's condition stop the patient from breathing? So again, double effect is a term to explain how one is allowed to carry on an action that might cause serious harm, even death, as a side effect of promoting some good. Organ transplant. Clients have the right to decide to become an organ donor and have the right to refuse organ transplantation as a treatment option. Did you know that one person can save up to 8 lives? And you have the right to be an organ donor because of the Uniform and Anatomical Gift Act. This is often done and denoted when you get your driver's license. And you must also be at least 18 years of age to indicate your wish if you want to be an organ donor. I read this Kidney for Sale. It's about Iran having a legal market for organs, especially kidneys, but the system won't always work. And so it's a really interesting read. Talks about the ethical dilemma of kidneys being sold in Iran. So take a look at it if you get a chance. The criteria is set for organ donation by the United Network for Organ Sharing. Until organs are recovered for transplant, mechanical support or a ventilator continues to supply oxygen to the organs. The machine is not keeping the patient alive because brain death, as we said, is irreversible at this point, and that's who donates their organs. But the patient is put on a ventilator or mechanical support to merely keep the organs viable until they can be recovered. The use of the phrase life support does not therefore apply to brain death. Life support may only be appropriate when there is a chance of recovery, for example, in the case of coma. Here I wrote, donor must be free of infectious diseases and cancer, but this is not always the case. Some publications that I read say that an HIV donor can donate to another HIV person and that they have their own policies and procedures for how that works. Organ transplant. We as nurses or the attending physician don't approach the patient. We merely communicate that this patient might be a candidate to this organization, this nonprofit organization here in El Paso that's called Southwest Transplant Alliance. And then a trained professional comes and approaches the family. Another thing to know about organ transplants is that donations do not delay a funeral, and there is no evidence that the organs have been removed if they have an open casket funeral. If you want more information, click on this website, Becoming a Donor. This is more information about organ transplantation. This is a story about liver allocation and how organ transplantation works. The next few slides about pain management and assessing pain. We know this is an important area and topic for nursing, but I really want to get to other topics that perhaps are not really talked about, and so please review the next slides on your own. Palliative care is a concept and includes hospice, and in a bit we will talk about why. Palliative care is used in conjunction with a cure focus versus hospice, which is focused on comfort. Palliative care emphasizes psychological, social, spiritual pain management and physical symptom management. One of the best ways I can use to describe palliative care is to use it as an example. Say you were diagnosed with cancer. You would definitely experience a change and disruption in your social, spiritual, psychological life with your family and other areas. But of course you would want to pursue a cure, and that is your right. But medicine focuses on the body and not on the mind or the spirit all the time. This is where palliative care comes in. It is a model to treat the patient holistically while they are pursuing a cure. Which brings us to the next point of hospice care, which is focused on comfort. It is delivered at the end of life, usually with a terminal illness, versus palliative care can be done whenever, doesn't have to be at the end of life. With hospice care, the patient generally and usually has less than 6 months to live. Hospice focuses on quality of life by focusing on accepting death and making it as peaceful, comfortable for the patient and the family. If you want to know a little bit more about palliative sedation and palliative care or assisted dying in hospice, then go ahead and click on these links. You all should be familiar with advanced directives, so I'm not going to spend too much time, but I do want to mention that advanced directives include living wills and power of attorneys. Advanced directive is a broad term for any instruction or directives you give in advance to your provider, or what you would want to have done for you if you are unable to speak or make those decisions known. A living will is included in an advanced directive. So is a durable power of attorney for healthcare or a healthcare proxy. Gives a little bit more information about advanced directives you can read on your own. Artificial hydration and nutrition. This is an issue or a topic that deals more with an ethical issue of culture and personal beliefs about hydration and nutrition. Not so much with the life-sustaining measure of hydration and nutrition. What I mean is, often when a person is near death, they no longer require as much hydration and nutrition as if they were well or walking around, or better yet, recovering sometimes in the hospital. So sometimes when a patient is near death and they're resisting eating or not drinking, most of the time the family members begin to notice and become worried because all of a sudden grandma, grandpa, mom, or dad don't want to eat their favorite meal. There is lots of emotions and culture and memories tied and associated with food that science doesn't really support. Science actually shows that if we give hydration or nutrition to a dying patient, it can actually be harmful than helpful. A patient that is nearing death usually retains fluid, and it starts to divert the body's already limited resources to digestion, rather than life-sustaining measures to stay alive, or to just stay alive for those individuals that want to say goodbye to the patient. How oftentimes have you eaten a heavy meal and then you get like food coma afterwards and you start to get sleepy? So you know that digestion takes a lot of energy for the body to either assimilate or eliminate the food that we eat. So imagine now if a patient is near the end of life, they're fighting to even pump their next heart pump to get the blood flow. And now you put food in their stomach, it's going to divert the energy that they would to just stay awake, and now they need to digest. And if the body is barely surviving, then food and hydration aren't priorities, but rather become less important at that time. Helping families understand this is our role when it comes to hydration and nutrition. If you want to read an interesting case surrounding artificial hydration and nutrition, click on Terry Schiavo case and learn more. It is like super interesting, you guys. Professional nursing. I'm not going to read this to you, but the Board of Nursing defines professional nursing right here. So it basically sums up your 2 years of college, or however long you were in college to become a nurse, and it sums it up in this small sentence. So you can kind of sum up your nursing journey in that sentence right there. There's your criteria for being a profession, activities that promote nursing, organizations. I most certainly want to encourage you to pursue your certification in nursing, and so I'm going to stop here and talk a little bit about that. Certification and licensure are different. When you get your license, you graduate, and then you pass your boards, and then you become licensed. But this only allows you to practice as a generalist nurse. Once you settle into the unit you work in and you like, then you can become certified in that particular area. Each unit that you work in and each unit or specialty that you want to get certified in has their own standards and criteria that you need to meet in order for you to sit for your certification. For instance, if you work in critical care, then you can get your CCRN, which on your name badge, it would have your name, RN, CCRN. If you want to become certified in trauma or wound care, then you would have these titles after your name. And then there's other organizations and affiliations you can associate yourself with in order to become more specialized. I want to point out that as you do your ATI comprehensive test coming up real soon in RNSG 2130, you will get these self-analysis results. These results mirror the NCSBN, or National Council of State Boards of Nursing. And if you go into the NSBN website, you will see that the NCLEX blueprint is there, and you can start to see how your performance is and would be if you were to take the NCLEX today. So on the NCSBN website, this is the blueprint that they provide to you. You're going to get the majority of your questions under management of care, and they talk about the different questions that are involved, the different questions that would be included under management of care, and all these other subcategories. So I really encourage you to look at that to prepare for your NCLEX. I want to briefly mention that EPCC has a joint commission that accredits us. It's not called Joint Commission, it's called ASIN, and they look to make sure that we are following standards so that we are an accredited school. These are called DECs, or Differentiated Essential Competencies. Do you recognize these 4 nursing areas? Member of a profession, provider of patient-centered care, patient safety advocate, member of the healthcare team. Well, we're here, member of a profession, because this topic is on member of a profession. Anyways, you will find the same language on the Board of Nursing on your NCLEX and in your competencies when you go to clinical. And if you don't remember these, then you haven't been paying attention. Pay attention, you guys. You'll see them. Ever heard of nursing schools not being accredited? Does Anamark ring a bell? Question. Does graduating from a non-accredited school not permit you to sit for your boards? What do you guys think? Well, if you answered no, you're correct. But what I want you to know is that where it does limit you graduating from a non-accredited school is when you decide to pursue your education. Because the school that you want to get admitted into might require that you would have graduated from an accredited nursing program. So be thankful that you are graduating from an accredited nursing school, because if you weren't, and let's say you were going to UTEP or you were going to Texas Tech or some other school, and on their admission paperwork they say you needed to have your nursing license and graduated from an accredited undergraduate program, and if your program was not accredited, then you would not be able to apply to that program. Maintaining competence, you guys, I would look at this. Make sure that you are going to the Texas Board of Nursing and looking at the competencies that you need in order to maintain your license, that you are up to standard. For instance, if you are a nurse in the state of Texas, as part of your continuing competency program, any license holder shall complete at least 2 hours of continuing education related to nursing jurisprudence and nursing ethics before the end of every third 2-year licensing period. And this is from the Board of Nursing. If you are in ER, if you work as an ER nurse, as part of the continuing education requirements, those that are employed in the ER setting are required under the board rules to comply with this section shall complete at least 2 hours of continuing education credit related to forensic evidence collection. So there it is. I also encourage you to go to the Board of Nursing to get continuing education credits because it's available there. Thank you so much for your attention, and let me know if you have any questions. Jot them down and we'll talk about them in Retain. Take care.